in my career over the last sort of 30 odd years, I spent a lot of time working with retail and consumer brands and a lot of time in consumer facing industries. And what I wanted to do today was spend some time talking to you about what's going on in retail right now and how we're looking at what retail and consumer facing businesses will be leaning into over the next 12 or 18 months. And I've got a whole bunch of things I want to take you through. And we've called this presentation today the Year of Retailing Bravely. That is 2021, the Year of Retailing Bravely. So I'd like to start with this slide. This slide is what our retail turnover has looked like for the last 12 months or so. And you'll see that the heading of this slide is what goes down must go up. In fact, I like to call 2020 retail's son-in-law year. In other words, it wasn't quite what you hoped for, but turned out a bit better than you expected. And the reason I say that is that what you can see there is on the right-hand side of this graph is a tremendously diverse and strong retail growth scenario in circumstances whereby if you go back for the last 5 years or so, what you'll see there is that history has kept it pretty consistent over the journey. And when I break that down on a month-to-month basis over the last 12 months, you'll see that other than April last year, we have had a phenomenal growth in retail and consumer spending. And when you're looking at months there of 12% year-on-year growth and 13% year-on-year growth compared to the long-term average of 2%, we are seeing really quite dramatic outcomes in terms of consumer sales. So you then break that down by category, and this graph works from right to left because not everybody has been a winner in this market. And you'll see on the right-hand side of this graph, you'll see that liquor and recreation goods are travelling at about a 30% year-on-year growth. What that means is that in the middle of COVID, particularly in Victoria where I come from, the first thing that people did when they went into lockdown was they went and got drunk, right? They basically went off and they bought a whole bunch of booze. They worked out they were drinking too much. They decided they needed to get fit. So they then thought, gee, I better go and set up my home gym. And then after that, I started to think about, okay, well, now what do? We now have to start thinking about setting up my home office and getting myself a new TV, a new computer. And you can see as you work from the right to the left of this graph that all the things you would expect that we would spend money on in a work-from-home environment is exactly what we did. On the left-hand side, however, you see some of the casualties of the last 12 months. Unsurprisingly, clothing retail, particularly if you're dressed like me right now in a suit and you're not working from home, that really took a beating. Footwear took a beating unless you're talking about gym footwear or gym clothing. And then, of course, hospitality, cafes and restaurants. All of those areas really got hammered and are only now starting to cycle out of it. And that sort of damage has got some way to play through. So whilst we actually had a phenomenal year last year in terms of consumer spending, not everybody was a winner. In addition to that, what we did see is we saw about an extra 5 million Australians went online. In other words, Australians who were not previously shopping online, COVID forced them online. And one of the things about COVID is when you think about it, COVID itself was not a disruptive event. It was actually an accelerator of disruption. The impact of that is that we have seen large sections of our community force-fed, if you like, into a digital and online environment whereby previously they were only in a physical environment. And a lot of those behaviours will not revert to pre-COVID. In other words, online will stick and it will continue to stick in a dramatic way. And I could talk about that a bit more actually. So when you actually then look at what's happening here, this is really interesting. This graph is telling you the acceleration effect between food and non-food. And even though you see food coming off a relatively low base, it still increased quite dramatically over the course of the last 12 months impacted by COVID. One myth I want to clear up for you is this. You'll often read in the papers that the percentage of sales online in Australia is about 12%. If you look at the UK, it's about 22%, and the US is about 18 or 19%, in particular before COVID. Those numbers, though, don't tell the correct story. You need to break food and non-food out. When you start looking at non-food, so general merchandise, the sort of things that were winners as part of the last 12 months, that number is much, much higher. In Australia, the non-food penetration online is at least in the vicinity of 25% and trending towards 30 and 35%. In the UK market, non-food retail, clothing, toys and baby, kitchen appliances, electronics, they are averaging over 50% of total sales online. Bring that back to food, and when you start to see food historically was doing 2 or 3%, it's now moving up into the high single figures and the low double digits. There has been a genuine increase in the level of food take-up that's being sold online, particularly through COVID. Now, one of the reasons why we are in this, what I would describe, artificial retail bubble, where everybody has got a lot of cash and spending is so strong, is because of the amount of stimulus that has been put out there by federal government and now state governments. In the city that I live in Victoria, the state government's stimulus is the same amount as the federal government stimulus for the whole of Australia. And indeed, the stimulus provided during COVID is 4 times the amount of stimulus that was provided during the GFC only 10 years ago. That's an enormous amount of cash. And if you think about the amount of cash sitting on household balance sheets, Moody's, the international ratings agency, came out with a report about 3 weeks ago, and they said that in household balance sheets around the world, there is something like $7 trillion of excess savings sitting in household balance sheets. So this stimulus is creating an enormous amount of cash and stimulating consumer spending. And because of that, and because we're not travelling, we've got more cash, we are saving like we haven't saved for 50 years. In fact, you've got to go back to 1974 and arguably World War II to actually really see the sort of saving rates that we're currently seeing in the Australian economy. Now, they're coming off a little bit, but they're still well and truly above average, and that is impacting, continues to impact consumer spending, but also is being driven by this enormous stimulus that I talked about, which is now starting to come off. So the COVID stimulus to support consumer spending is pretty much going to dry up by about June, and it's being replaced at a federal and a state level by a series of spending buckets, including infrastructure, aged care, healthcare, hospital, and all of that sort of stuff will continue to drive the economy, but won't of itself necessarily drive consumer spending, or if it does, it'll drive it in pockets. So the COVID impacted consumers, but COVID also impacted retailers. One of the ways it impacted consumers was that it changed shopping habits. This graph is talking to you about where consumers shopped during COVID, and what you see there is the maroon bar, the top blue line, which I think it's kind of a purple line, is neighbourhood shopping centres. One of the things that we did during COVID is we went shopping at places that were easy for us to get in and out of quickly, that didn't chew up a lot of time during the day, and that we felt safe going to. So neighbourhood shopping centres were a big recipient of our COVID spending, whereas the bigger shopping centres, the Westfields, the vicinity type shopping centres, obviously didn't get the same level of traction as what we would otherwise have expected, because people were going to their local butcher, their local greengrocer, their local supermarket. The other thing that happened, this is an interesting graph, is it also COVID changed when we shop, because we're now working from home, right? Or we're working from home a lot of the time. So what you see there is that the left-hand side is for small shopping centres, and that's telling you the number of unique visitors by the day of the week across the retail shopping format. And what you're seeing there is that we started to shop as a community a lot more on a Monday and a lot more on a Sunday than we previously had. And in fact, Monday to Sunday traffic went up significantly. On the right-hand side of the graph, you're then seeing what time of day did we start to shop. And what we see there is that there was actually a lift in people shopping early in the morning and about lunchtime, and a decline in people shopping later in the afternoon and in the evening. So we started to behave differently as consumers, and that impacted how retailers were responding to this demand. And that's all driven by the work from home change that has shifted how people are now behaving in that context. Now, there's been also a shift in what we value. And one of the things that COVID has done is it's highlighted to consumers personal safety, transparency around the products that they buy and the ethical nature of the products that they buy. And they're concerned about sustainability. They're concerned about purpose. They're concerned about supporting local. And you've seen a lot of consumers are now much more focused on purchasing locally made product which is authentic or is artisan or is unique to their demographic or their geographic location. So this has become a stronger and stronger theme driven before COVID, but COVID again accelerating this type of behaviour. And indeed, as a result of work from home also meant cook from home. And we started to see a huge uptake in the amount of people actually cooking from home. My wife sells a kitchen device called a Thermomix, and Thermomix sales during COVID went through the roof because everybody knew they couldn't live off Uber Eats, and they started to think, well, I need to start cooking and eating a bit healthier because I'm spending all this time at home. So again, you found a lot more people discovering the kitchen, particularly young people, and spending time trying to cook healthier meals. Indeed, when you look at local supermarket environments, my local supermarket environment has a Woolworths and it has a private fruit and vegetable store called Lamana. Now, the difference, Lamana and Woolworths are right next to each other in this shopping centre where I live. The difference between the two is that you will spend about 20% more at Lamana, but I can tell you the fresh fruit and the fresh produce is at least 50% better. What you're finding is people are now making choices around where they'll shop. They'll go to Woolworths for some particular items and they'll go to a bespoke or a boutique grocery outlet or fresh food out for other items. And it really did become quite noticeable to me that you saw people shopping with real destinations in mind and for bespoke purchases. The other thing I wanted to point out, which grew through COVID, was the impact of home delivery for fresh food. We live near the Paran market in Melbourne, and once again, we discovered the Paran market online capability where you could jump online, you could order your fruit and veg, your coffee, your tea, your bakery, and you could have it delivered to you at home. And it was amazing how the quality of that fresh food and how that came together. So it's a really interesting change in shopping habits. I know that the young people who work in our business, people under 30, they don't go to the markets. They spend their whole time buying everything online, including food and including fresh produce. So there's 4 trends when we think about COVID, we think about the accelerating effect, and we think about the global model going forward. There's really 4 trends that I'd like you to think about going forward. First of all, for many retailers these days, they are focusing on becoming platform retailers or leveraging platforms. So a platform retailer is Amazon, Alibaba, it's Rakuten if you're in Japan, and increasingly you're finding retailers look to become platforms whereby they can offer more than what they just sell as their traditional produce. And indeed, if you're a business as usual retailer, you are probably facing into a very significant challenge on how your model will sustain itself in the future if you are not leveraging a platform, and indeed if you are not leveraging digital. And in fact, one of my clients at the moment talks about retail and consumer as having a twin personality. In other words, one part of the personality is physical and one part of it is digital. And if you're just focusing on physical, then you're not focusing on where people are spending most of their time from a retail perspective. You'll also see the second thing is that retail generally has been under a significant pressure and a decline over the last 10 years. If you look at the left-hand side there, you'll see the net margin for food has been in decline. This is supermarkets, from 6% down to 5.3%, down to 4.9%. That's forcing a lot of retailers to think about their range, about their spatial planning, how they set out their stores, about workforce optimization, and about how they support supply chain and delivery with technology, and how they support customer interaction with technology. So these are all, again, important things to think about in terms of in terms of contextualizing how retailers are dealing with consumers up front. In fact, one of the hidden liabilities on a lot of retailers' balance sheets is the investment that they haven't yet made in digital and technology in respect of their supply chain, but also in respect of how they engage with customers directly. Now, I mentioned purpose before. What you're finding is pre-COVID and post-COVID, more and more people are expecting their retailers and their favourite brands to be giving back, to have a reason for being, to be connecting with their communities. And it's not only the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys looking right to left on this slide, but it's also increasingly the Gen Xs and the baby boomers. We want to know that we're supporting businesses who have values and a purpose that align with ours as consumers. And then lastly, we've always valued value, convenience and experience, but now choice, purpose and privacy are becoming the real drivers of consumer behaviour. Choice insofar as the example I mentioned before, I will go to Woolworths for some things and La Mana for another thing. Purpose I mentioned in terms of the values proposition, in terms of what the retailer stands for, what the brand stands for, and what do I stand for, and do those values align? And then privacy is around most consumers are happy to share information, are happy to share content, provided they see a benefit that's going to directly enhance their lives and also support and align with the values that they live by. So some key considerations in terms of what new retail and what old retail looks like. Retail's always been historically about stores and about inventory. But these days in the modern digital world, it's about brand, e-commerce and IP, and it's about customer data. And those two things are real drivers of retail. And I wanted to show you this slide, and I'm not going to go through all of this, so don't worry about it. The metrics of retail performance used to be sales, margin, inventory turnover, and how many stores I've got. Now, if you look at this particular graph, what you're seeing is modern day retail are measuring traffic to their websites. They're measuring the percentage of the site converted to local currency. They're measuring the percentage of sales by territory. They're looking at their databases. They're looking at how many customers they've got on their database, who's active, who's lapsed. They're looking at conversion rates, and conversion rates online by device, by mobile, by iPad, by laptop. They're looking at who's abandoning baskets online, who's completing the checkout, how many followers have they got on social media, what's their net promoter score. They're looking at what are the return rates for product, what's the average delivery time from when I can sell a product to get into the hands of the customer, what's the delivery cost per unit, how fast is the website, how fast consumers can get to my digital site, how many errors come up, how many failed searches come up, and what does my online channel shift rate looks like, what percentage of market share do I have. That's just a few examples of the kind of metrics that retail and consumer brands now focus on. And that is a long way from where we were 5 years ago. And this is the future. This is where everybody is focusing on to drive success for their businesses. I hope you got something out of that presentation. I hope it was able to stimulate your thinking and reflect and allow you to have the opportunity to reflect on how that might impact your businesses and the environment you work in. You're more than welcome to reach out to me directly if you'd like to chat. I'm at KPMG. I'm based in Melbourne.